Okay. All right. There. Shabbat Shalom. Yes, sir. Right now it's Erev Shabbat Shalom. It's Shabbat to us. Anyway, it's going down.
Started it.
It's going down. Hallelujah. We want to, this week we're going to look at, continuing to look at the tabernacle. Continue to look at the tabernacle. We'll look a little bit in Exodus. This week's portion was Exodus 26, verse 31 through 27:19. We'll talk about a couple things inside of that. Then we'll go over to Ezekiel 16, verse 10 through 19. And we'll finish up with Matthew 23, 1 through 28. We'll talk about a couple of things here in Exodus, seeing as how we've got multiple chapters coming up to, that are dealing with this tabernacle. This week we'll just deal with, like I said, a couple of things inside of Exodus, and we'll see how the verses that we'll look at kind of relate to the verses over in Ezekiel. And again, like I said, we'll wrap it up in Matthew. But let's start off. Let's look at, let's actually read just a few verses here. Exodus 26:31 through 26, verse 31 through 34.
I'll read it. And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet material and fine twisted linen. I'll start again. And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet material and fine twisted linen. It shall be made with cherubim, the work of a skillful workman. And you shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia laid with gold, their hooks also being of gold. On 4 sockets of silver. And you shall hang up the veil under the clasps, and shall bring in the ark of the testimony there within the veil. And the veil shall serve as a partition between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And you shall put the mercy seat on the ark of the testimony in the Holy of Holies.
Okay, very good. So we want to really look at, just look at this, deal with this whole veil, with the actual partition. That thing that separated, made the separation inside the actual tent. Again, we had the tent, which we looked at last week, which it consisted of the most holy place, a room in the tent that was divided by the veil that we just read about. In the most holy place, we had the ark of the covenant, the ark of the witness, the ark of the testimony.
Witness.
that was inside of the most holy place. And then we talked about here in those verses, we looked at the veil that was made out of the purple and the blue and the purple, the scarlet and the fine twisted linen. And on it, as it says in verse 31, it shall be made with cherubim, the work of a skillful workman. So
that's why I say that you can have images of things in heaven and on earth. You don't, as long as you're not worshiping, you know,
right.
You can still have it.
Right, yes, because we see two examples with the shalom.
Shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Can you mute yourself? Okay, thanks. Okay, so right, that's a good point that you make there in terms of that, because we see with the ark on the actual ark there are the cherubim, and here we see the example of the embroidered cherubim that are sewn into the actual veil that made the distinction. So yeah. So when we looked at the commandments, I remember we talked about that idea of, you can't look at the things where when you look at those first couple verses where it says, "Thou shalt not make these things of heaven and of earth," but at the end it says that you may worship them. You have to take all of that together and not just say that I can't just blanket not make these things, but the idea is me worshiping them. I think the difference is when it comes to, and I said this before, the difference is when it comes to making an image that you're saying is a representation of the Messiah.
Oh yeah.
If you was to just make that picture, just like the picture that we all know of the white Jesus, when we think about Messiah, we have this image in our mind, which just happens to be this false image, and it really causes us to
that's because
get idol worship.
That's what the Catholic people have.
Right. Well, yeah, because they're into that. They're into making images, and they don't really care, in spite of the fact that it literally says, "Don't do this," and bow down to it. They do both. They do the thing, and they bow down to it. Right. But here, okay, but what we wanted to look at here is this idea of the curtain, the veil, the thing that's making that separation between the most holy place and the holy place, and having these different colors on it, and also the embroidery of the cherubim. When we look at some of these things, the different colors, when we look at these different colors, we'll see that we can look at different colors and get like these different kind of concepts and ideas from the actual colors. I'd like to think that Yahweh, whenever he made these commands, and said, "I want this veil to be blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen," whether that fine linen is like just the plain linen, which would be like close to white, or or he's just talking about, using the fine linen, the dye, blue, purple. I'm saying when we look at this, either this is blue, purple, scarlet, and whatever color linen is, off white,
beige,
or it's just giving you the blue, purple, and scarlet colors without the white. But we know that it's all fine linen, and we know that it's, these linen don't come blue, scarlet, and purple. He's dyeing it. So when we look, we see, you find out that it's not easy. It's not easy to, to make these dyes, to dye these fabrics here. Some people say that the dyes that were used, not just the blue, but also the scarlet as well. Purple's a secondary color. The blue and the scarlet, which is basically red, you'll find can be made from these various bugs, which is interesting. Actually, they still was that the raspberry? What flavor was that with the yogurt today?
Oh, strawberry.
Strawberry yogurts.
Sometimes raspberry too.
Yeah, you gotta check. What was it? Is that cochineal or something?
Yeah, something.
I'm not saying that that's what they used.
But they say that they used that little snail bug thing.
But there was a bug that they definitely used for the blue. But I'm saying, I found out that they also use it for the red. But all I'm saying is that I don't know if it's the same one that they use now,
to eat
industrially to make.
They could dye stuff.
Yeah, now they got. Anyway, be it as it may, imagine if you're making these veils and these curtains for a huge tabernacle. How many bugs that it took to go out and get enough to make this dye. Not to gross you out or anything, but the idea is the work that goes into it. It really made this thing. It like silk is so expensive because it's such a hard thing to make.
Art too.
Right? So it's the same kind of thing when you're looking at this coloring of these fabrics. It's just kind of circumstantial information that it's bugs. The point is that it's this laborious process that they went through in order to do this thing. Would you try to say something there, Sister Seth?
Sister Sarah, you have some input?
I thought you were trying to say something.
You don't think they could have brought this stuff from Egypt already colored, already dyed? That they some of the stuff that they borrowed, so to speak, was already dyed and there, because it would be very precious. And I'm sure the Egyptians, when we look at a lot of their relics, there was a lot of color that they did use. So, and they loved linen. Linen was one of the main fabrics that they used there in Egypt. They have, brought that just with them already dyed.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility to say that they brought the stuff with them. I would agree that. I don't know that they made it there or if they brought it. I think the key point is that this stuff was very it was precious, it was rare, it wasn't just your old run-of-the-mill stuff that they was using to make these things. And also this whole idea of this twisted, does it say that in your, what's it saying?
Mine says twisted linen. Fine twisted
this
linen.
idea of this way of
31.
twisting the linen, actually, I did see that was something that they actually did do in Egypt. That was a thing, a method that they used to kind of make these different fabrics, was this twisting thing. I did see that. So whether they brought the whole thing like that or they made it out there, he was definitely dealing with this kind of high quality product. When you think about looking at the colors, different ideas you can think about when you think about the different colors. It seems like when I think about blue, you automatically think about water. Water's, I guess, blue-ish. And when you talk about the heavens is right. It's the water. Hashemayim.
The sky.
When we talk about the skies or the heavens, it's another way to think about water. So when we think about the tzitzit, how it's supposed to remind us to keep the commandments. I think the idea is that it reminds us to look to Yahweh, which who's in the heavens, right? So I think it's easy to make the connection between blue and the heavens in terms of this being this color that one of the colors that was used in terms of this
the veil. Do you think that it was necessary to have this veil? Because obviously the holy place wasn't common.
What you mean?
I'm talking about the veil. We're talking about this partition.
Yeah.
And that the holy place itself wasn't common. Only the priest could go in there.
Right. But then there still had to be that separation.
But there was still a separation.
Like what we read here was talking about the separation. Well, the veil. If you're talking about the veil, we're only talking about the separation between the holy place and the most holy place, which of course was more set apart than the holy place. So then
it's like there's different levels of even sanctification.
Right, exactly.
Within the
and we touched on that a little bit last week, dealing with the holiness that starts inside and works its way out. You got the most holy place, which is set apart, to the most degree. The holy place, which is set apart, but it's not as set apart as the most holy place. And then now you got outside of the tabernacle itself into the courtyard outside, where the brazen altar, which we didn't get to that part yet. The brazen altar and the laver and stuff is that it's set apart, where there's that even still that there's a degree of holiness that's maintained there. And then outside of that, even and dealing with the camp that's around about the tabernacle. But then when you talk about layers of holiness, then you have, I guess, which would be the least holy, would be outside of the camp, where those that were unclean, or those that were cast out, were placed outside of the camp. So we see, definitely we see layers of sanctification and various levels of holiness. But again, here we're looking at the various colors that were used for the veil. We're just thinking about how the blue is giving you kind of, you can look at blue and think about how it symbolizes the heavens. Just see this verse real quick. What does this say? Flipping over here to 4. Oh. Okay, so chapter 24, verse 20 says, and they saw the Elohim of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of a sapphire stone, as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. So we think about sapphire stone. Actually, we'll talk more about sapphire in a minute, but when we look at sapphire, it's one of those, it's actually something that can come in different colors. And bluish color, a bluish color could be a color that it will come in, which of course again is giving you that picture of the heavens. Purple, let's see what we can find about purple, which is another color that we see, which is a mixture of, if you have, we'll make purple, red and blue, right?
Yep.
So what makes purple?
Mm-hmm.
Red and blue makes purple. Let's talk about red before we talk about purple then. Red, which would be scarlet is what it says, right? Scarlet, which is red. Yeah, scarlet, which is basically red. When we think about red, it's easy to think about blood. When you think about red, all blood, you can think about life. You can think about the giving of life or sacrifices, which of course was a major part of what goes on with the tabernacle in terms of sacrifice. So when you think about red or scarlet, it's easy to think about this idea of sacrifice. Think about the heavens and sacrifice together. It's easy to think about Yeshua. It's easy to see Yeshua here, where he comes from the heavens and sacrifice for sin. Purple oftentimes is thought of as something that signifies royalty. You can see how, if we're thinking about making it, if we're thinking about making purple, what would go into making it, which again would make it just a rare kind of a thing. where you got to get this special blue and this red and mixing those together just right. But again, if we're looking at all three of these things, if we're looking at blue and scarlet and purple, if we think about the heavens and sacrifice by the king, who is Yeshua, it's interesting just to be able to look at these colors that are being used, even the colors that are being used in the veil, which are giving you this symbolism of Yeshua, and causing you to think on Yeshua. And of course the gold, which is this, that they use for the loops and the pillars, actually were the pillars and the hoops were made with gold.
I was thinking about the fact, like, we're talking about veils and stuff, and talking about weddings and brides and different things like that, and just thinking about how is this veiling for Yah or for us, or for, what I mean? Like, how, like, whose side should we be looking at it from? Seems like because the tabernacles, the description starts on the inside looking out, that it would be like the Most High kind of looking out at his people. You know what I mean? And then it's like kind of like their veil, and there's layers to the veil or whatever, layers to get into the people. And it's probably for protection because he's so holy. But, it's like, it's kind of, if we're looking out,
I think
that would be like how someone,
I think
like
it can be both.
out at the husband or whatever.
I think it can be both. For sure, it can be both. When you think about life, the het, life. It's that thing that makes division. It's that thing that makes distinction. It deals with both the things that are inside as well as those things which are outside. So you can look at it really from either perspective, in terms of the most holy place is holy because that was a place where Yahweh's presence was to dwell. That place where Yahweh was, you can't defile that place. You can't defile that place. You can't go in there and ruin it. You go in there and it ruins you. Right? Nadab and Abihu went in there and they got killed. Right? Well, I guess I gotta take that back. You can't really say that it can't be defiled, because on the Day of Atonement they did indeed cleanse it. So the work, as it did work, it for lack of a better word, it became dirty over the year. But we talk about ceremonially dirty. So there are effects. The cleansing, the atoning work that it did has an effect on it. You think about Yahweh, you think about Yeshua, the atoning work.
He took upon himself.
He took upon himself the sin of the world. That has an effect on Yeshua. That had an effect on him when he, in his flesh, dealt with what was going to be happening in terms of him taking sin on him the separation that would cause between Yeshua and Yahweh. The thing that they was, when we think about the nature of Yeshua, at some point you really have to think about the idea that there was a type that happened when Yeshua actually did his atoning work, a separation that never had happened before, right? So Yeshua, looking forward to that time and whatever happened, I'm not going to sit up here and pretend like I can describe what that means, but something happened, some type of separation had happened that Yeshua was looking forward to as a result of the effect of him atoning for the sin. He's dealing with our sin, just like when we went into when a priest went into the most holy place and took the blood in there, that sin is being dealt with, but it's having an effect on the most holy place, which is interesting. I never even thought about that. So we can see in the heavens and on earth that when that atoning thing is happening inside the most holy place, it's not kind of a one-way holiness. Yeah, it's affecting Yahweh and it's affecting the people. The people are being cleansed of their debt. Yahweh's wrath is being pacified. But at the same time, we're seeing that, whatever needs to happen is happening in the Holy of Holies on earth and in heaven. Because when we look at Hebrews, it talks about what Yeshua does in terms of him going into the most holy place that was not made by hands. He's doing the same thing that the high priest did on earth in the heavens, which is interesting.
Because that's what Yeshua's doing right now.
Right. That's what is going on. He goes and he takes his shed blood into the most holy place, and when he returns, it's going to be judgment time. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so the colors, again, cause us to think about the different things in terms of, we can see Yeshua, we can see the heavens, we can see that sin sacrifice, and then of course you have the cherubim that are there. It's interesting when you look back at Genesis 3:24, Genesis 3:24, where it says, "So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life." So when man was, let me get one of those. When man was taken from, in a paper towel, when man was taken from the garden, we see how there was this veil that was put up. Right here it was just the cherubim and the sword. You think about, if you ever watch like the kung fu, whenever they be swirling them sticks around. Yeah. When you swirling them sticks around, I guess if you did it fast enough, it really would form like a look. It would look like it, like you would be seeing like instead of seeing a stick, you would see. Or like if it's going in all directions, if you see a line, if you see a line going in all directions, if it's going really fast, at the end of the day, it's going to look like a solid thing, man. And you know, so you have kind of the imagery of this veil being created to keep man out from the garden, out from Eden, out from the presence of Yahweh.
It's a partition.
Right, it's a partition. That's right there. We saw the first partition in Genesis chapter 3, verse 24. Now, when we look at Matthew 27 and 51, we see that it says, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks did rent also. The rocks tore too. And then people was raising from the dead, and all kinds of things was going on. But we see where, with the death of Yeshua, with what Yeshua has done for us in that atoning work, how that veil, that thing that separates us from Yahweh, we see how that veil is torn. Now, what we have to remember about all of this, well, I'm sure what we remember, but what we have to remember to be able to relay to other people is that this is not just something we're able just to go into and deal with the presence of Yahweh just any old kind of way. Now there is you have the ability to deal with and become intimate with the actual presence of Yahweh, but it's not just a free-for-all, just be however you want to be. Yahweh's still holy, right? So he makes us to be, now he can literally make us to be holy, where he's dealing with our conscience. He can actually deal with our actual our desires now and change us in a way that he couldn't do before. But there is that access that is made through what Yeshua has done. So
I think the problem is that people think that now he is common. Yeah. He made himself common for us, but instead he made us holy. Yeah. So that, it's the reverse.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's not like
he definitely did not make himself common. He makes us holy. That's what he does. That's exactly.
So people think that they could just go with all their sin, and he has no choice.
He's ready. He's ready to take away all of your sin for sure.
But they think they can keep their sin.
but
and still be able to be in the presence.
This is why people really need to get an understanding of who Yahweh is, looking back to the foundation, looking back to the Torah, and getting an understanding of who Yahweh is, so that when we look at the new writings, we look at the so-called New Testament, and we see these things happening, we don't look at it with this Greek mindset and think about it in ways that we shouldn't think about. Yes, he makes himself available, but it's not because he's lessening himself, but he builds us up, right? He took us from that one that was ready to do wickedness as soon as we was born, right? And he changes us, like he says in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah, where he changes our heart and changes into a new creation. Which we can look at chapter 2 of Ephesians. Look at chapter 2 of Ephesians. Let's look at that. Because we're still talking about the veil. We're still talking about what Yeshua has done for us in terms of removing the veil. But we can get some kind of specifics in terms of what he's doing. You look at Ephesians chapter 2, 13 through 16.
Let me read or no?
Yeah, just let me get 1 second to get there, but yeah, read it.
But now, Messiah Yeshua, you who formerly were far off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall, by abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace, and might reconcile them both in one body to Elohim through the cross, by it having put to death the enmity.
Okay, very good. So we see in the context, there's two things going on here. We see what Yeshua has done for the Gentile. He sees what Yeshua has done for the Gentile in terms of back in verse 12, where it says how, being aliens of the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants and promises, having no hope without him in the world. But now, Yeshua, for those that were far off, he makes nigh. Those that were far off, he makes nigh. So in the context, it's talking about the Gentiles, right? But we see at the end of the day, when it gets to the end of the day, where it says in verse 16, that he might reconcile both unto Elohim in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby. He starts out talking about the Gentiles, but at the end of the day, there's two things that's happening. There's a reconciliation that's going on between Jew and Gentile, but there's also a reconciliation that's being made between mankind as a whole and Elohim. So when we look at that, this version I have here says it and broke down the middle wall of partition, which again is dealing with kind of the metaphorical partition that makes a distinction between the Jew and the Gentile, and then the actual middle wall of partition that keeps everybody away from Yahweh. Right, so there in Ephesians we see two things going on here with what Yeshua has done simultaneously in terms of reconciling Israel, the Jew and the Gentile, and reconciling mankind as a whole to himself. And we still see that picture there of this, this wall being torn, this veil that we looked at back in Exodus being separated. which of course gives us a picture of the new covenant, what Yeshua came to do for us through his sacrifice that he has made by giving his life. Okay. So that really, when we look in terms of Exodus, really that's all I wanted to look at in Exodus was the veil, the colors, and the cherubim. And as we look in Ezekiel,
It's just interesting that the cherubim is in the veil,
yeah,
on the mercy seat,
right, because it's giving you that
at
picture.
the garden. Yeah,
It's giving you that picture of them being there and kind of being part. They're part of the divider.
They're part of the blocking process.
They're part of the divider, whether it be on the mercy seat, or in the veil, or back in the garden. Go ahead. When we see the imagery of the heavenlies, we always see the cherubim even in the heavens, right? But let's look at Ezekiel, because we're going to go on with this idea of the heavenlies and these various colors that are giving us these pictures of who Yahweh is, where he is, so on and so forth. So let's look at Ezekiel 16, verse 10 through 19. Let's have Hizky read nice and loud. Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 10 through 19. Nice and loud.
16, 10 to 13. I clothed thee also with bordered work, and shod thee with badger's skin, and girded thee about with fine linen, and I covered thee with silk. I decked these also with ornaments, and I put bracelets upon thy hands, and chain on thy neck. And I put a jewel on thy forehead, and earrings on thine ears, and a beautiful crown upon thine head. Thus wast thou decked with gold and silver, and thy raiment was of fine linen and silk embroidered work. Thou didst eat fine flour and honey and oil, and thou wast exceeding beautiful, and thou didst prosper into a kingdom, and thy renown went forth among the heathen for thy beauty, for it was perfect through my comeliness. Comeliness, which I had put upon thee, saith the Elohim. But thou didst trust in thine own beauty, and playedst the harlot because of thy renown, of the pouredst out thy fornications on every one that passed by. His it was. And of the garments thou didst take, and decidest thy high places with the divers colors,
Mhm.
and
Played.
played the harlot thereupon. The like things shall come neither shall it be so. Thou
That's hold on, what did I say to?
Oh, you said
Oh, 19. Go ahead, keep going.
okay. Thou hast also taken thy fair jewels of my gold and my silver, which I have given thee, and madest to thyself thyself images of men, and didst commit whoredom with them, and tookest thy broidered garments and coveredst them.
Mm.
And thou hast set mine oil and mine incense before them. My meat also, which I gave thee, fine flour and oil and honey, wherewith I fed thee, thou hast even set it before them for a sweet savor. And thus it was, said the Elohim, our Elohim. Moreover, thou hast taken.
Wait, that's good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so when we look back at what's going on here, we can look at how it talks about Yahweh decking. Look, when we look at who he's talking about here, of course, he's speaking about Israel. Speaking about Israel, you know, who Yahweh took. Israel is described as the only begotten of Yahweh, and is also described as a bride or the wife of Yahweh. So we see that the two we see these two kind of metaphorical kind of concepts that are used to describe Israel. Here, of course, is the Israel as a bride. So it's giving you all of these different ways that Yahweh decked out his bride with all of the fancy garments and jewels. When we think about, again, like we was looking at earlier, the colors and stuff is giving us a picture of the heavenlies and of Yeshua. But also here, when we look at some of these things that is saying, we can also get other pictures and other connections that we can make when we look at, say, for instance, verse 14, where it says, "And thy renown went forth among the heathen for thy beauty, for it was perfect through my comeliness, which I have put upon thee, says Adonai Yahweh." Yahweh put his glory and his splendor upon. How did he do that? How does Yahweh put his glory and his splendor on Israel? where it's in a way where, you know, all of the nations can see. We look over in Deuteronomy. Look over in Deuteronomy chapter 4. We look over in Deuteronomy, Devarim chapter 4, verse 5, where it says, "Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as Yahweh my Elohim commanded me, that you should do so in the land whither you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who had Elohim so nigh unto them, as Yahweh our Elohim is in all things that we call upon him for?" So it says over in Deuteronomy, when Israel walks in the law, statutes, and commandments of Yahweh, in the sight of the people, they'll look and see wisdom and understanding. When Israel walks in the character of Yahweh, which is what the laws, the statutes, and commandments are, the character of Yahweh humanized. When Israel walks in the character of Yahweh, it is a type of beauty to the nations. It's a, for lack of a better word, it's something good to look at from the nations, something for the nations to look at and to desire for themselves, right? Which is as to say, as it says in 14, in terms of this renown that went forth among the heathen for their for thy beauty, right? The beauty that the people had was a beauty that was put on them by Yahweh. The beauty that Israel had was the beauty that Yahweh put on the people in the first place, which was what? Which was the commandments of Yahweh, which was the actual character of Yahweh through the commandments. It's interesting when we look at here how it's describing the beauty of Yahweh as these fine linens and these different types of colors and bracelets and ornaments that are being placed on the bride here. But we know this is all just metaphorical. It's just kind of just you know, pictures that's telling us about some other thing. When we look at various verses in the scriptures, we can see kind of this same kind of an idea going forth. If we look at, for instance, Revelation chapter 4. Yahweh's always giving us this colorful picture. This colorful picture of, you know, what it looks like, what he looks like, what it looks like in the heavens.
Revelation what?
Revelation chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. Which says, "And immediately I was in the spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne in sight like unto an emerald. Okay, so when we look here, we've seen in Revelation, John was shown the throne room of Elohim. He saw the throne. He saw one sitting on the throne, and he saw these marvelous colors, right? This jasper and this sardine stone, and there was a rainbow. There was a rainbow round about the throne, just color emanating off this beauty, this splendor that was emanating off of it. So we look at this here, jasper. Jasper is something that is entirely opaque. Opaque, I guess you see through it, right? That's what opaque is. Or sometimes feebly translucent at the edges, and it presents almost every variety of color. So this jasper is this thing that could actually emanate every color, which is kind of the picture that's given you in terms of the fact that there being this rainbow round about the throne. You have every color, all of these colors emanating out from the throne. Sardine stone was a thing that was red, blood red, I guess it was. It's red. So you had these reds, you had colors, this shiny, illustrious shine that's going through. The same thing with Daniel 7 and 9. It talks about there being this fiery flame. So in Daniel, is paying attention to the red, but it's still like this imminent kind of shine, this illumination that's going on in the presence of Yahweh. There's another example of that in Ezekiel 1:26-28, where it says, and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne as the appearance of a sapphire stone. A sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above it. And I saw as the color of amber. Amber is another kind of fiery, kind of shades of red. Again, emanating from this throne area, going down as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain. So again, we see in this rainbow thing that's going on, which again is similar to the Revelation in terms of this, this radiant, all different kind of colors shining all over the place from the throne of Yahweh. Now, the interesting thing about this word sapphire, which in the Hebrew sapphire. So the word that's translated as sapphire looks like this. But the word sefer which is this sapphire really is a derivative of, which that word there, sefer, which really means to write. To speak or to talk. Could mean all of these things, to speak or to talk. Or scribe or record or declare. So if you're writing or speaking or talking or declaring, you're declaring what? You're declaring words, right? If you're writing or speaking or talking or declaring, you're declaring the thing that you would be declaring is words. So this word that is translated as sapphire, which is this jewel, this gem that you see in the heavenlies, is really exactly the same word as what causes us to think about words, which is pretty interesting, right? Because what's the word of Yahweh? Because he says the Bible. The correct answer is, that's the correct, you're not wrong. What I'm looking for is Yeshua, right? The word of Yahweh is Yeshua.
The jewel of Yahweh is Yeshua. The sapphire of Yahweh is Yeshua.
Let's look at Hebrews real quick. Hebrews, we're going back to Ezekiel, but we're looking at how Yahweh decked out Israel. The beauty that was upon Israel was the written out word of Yahweh. But if we look at Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 says, Elohim, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these days, these last days, spoken unto us by his Son, spoken unto whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds. Verse 3 is what we're looking for. Who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the majesty on high. Who being the brightness of his glory, the brightness of his glory. When we think about the brightness of his glory, we think about the express image of his person, and then we look back at these other verses where it's talking about all these illustrious colors and jewels and fine linens of all these different colors, which are giving you this picture of the radiance of Yahweh. And now we see in Hebrews, we're talking about the brightness of his glory, who is Yeshua. It's kind of showing us all along, who Yeshua is, and pointing. And when we look back, we see these things that point to Yeshua. Okay, going back to Ezekiel, when we see all of the things that were adorned, that Israel was adorned with, when we think about it, we see that what Israel was adorned with was the character of Yahweh. The character of Yahweh. So when we look into the New Testament, we think about the character of Yahweh, we think about the spirit of Yahweh inside of us. We're still dealing with what? We're still dealing with the character of Yahweh. The spirit of Yahweh causes us to do the things that he would have for us to do. The spirit of Yahweh causes us to walk out the character of Yahweh, right? He pictures that by speaking about all of these wonderful jewels and colors and adornments and gold and silver and so on and so forth. And in the visions, the various visions that are seen, we see all these different jewels and colors and brightness and all of that. But then when we look and see what happens, we look and see what happens with Israel in terms of, in verse 15, in Ezekiel 16 and 15, we see what went wrong. When we look and see and understand in the new covenant, where we can look and see how all of his beauty, the brightness of his glory is on the inside of us, right? But when we look at back in Ezekiel, when we're dealing with the written word, the written word or the spoken word, or those things that were declared, in that old covenant, we're just talking about the things that were kind of just put on Israel, right? Where it wasn't it wasn't something that transformed Israel. It was just something that was put on them like jewels, right? Like just possessions, right? The law of Yahweh was just something that Israel had, but it wasn't something that Israel was, right? So it wasn't something that sustained them, right? So Israel began to believe that they were greater than what they were, right? Verse 15, but thou didst trust in thine own beauty and play the harlot because of thy renown, and pouredst out thy fornications on every one that passed by. His it was. Okay, so what we want to look at here is harlotry. We want to look at harlotry a little bit. Which is the word zana. 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 The word means highly fed. Highly fed. Adultery. Adultery. Fornication. Whoring. Harlotry. Okay, so this word Zanah has the plow, the mattock, which is the plow, the thing that got hooked up to the ox and was pulled for plowing, and the seed, and of course the hay, which is the man with his hands raised. In the context of a word, it kind of makes it a feminine word, right? So when we look at this, it's a picture of a mattock and a seed, in the sense of spreading of the seed, which when we talk about, harlotry or whoring, this is basically what you're dealing with, just a spreading of the seed just all over the place, right? When you think about sowing in general, it's just kind of just throwing it, right? When Yeshua talks about the sower, he's not doing anything kind of in a specific kind of like not in rows, like what we think about sowing. The spreader just taking the seed and he's just throwing it, right, all over the place.
That's called guerrilla planting.
Okay, Hiskey says that's called guerrilla planting, right?
Did you teach him that?
No, I've never heard that term in my life, not even once. Okay, so what we're talking about here is the spreading of the seed, right? So just a mixture, right? When something that happens, we have a mixture, right? When we think about the idea of Yahweh and his people, Yahweh is about exclusivity, right? He's about being the one and only Elohim, right? So what happened was the people, as it says, began to trust in their own beauty. They began to think that they was able to be, I guess, whoever they wanted to be. They was able to trust in their own strength and their own powers and their own abilities. And then they ended up going off and mixing with all of these other nations, right? So when something about this harlotry, and, it's talking about this spiritual fornication that was going on, this mixing with these other with these other gods. So again, it's taking this splendor, it's taking the beauty, it's taking all the things that were kind of these things that exemplified Yahweh, and just spreading them out all over the place, right? So if we had these things that was really supposed to be about Yahweh only, where now it gets to the place where they were it was about whoever just came along. Whoever came along, it says. Everyone that passed by was just brought into the situation, which defiles the situation, right? So we see back in Exodus, we see kind of how the foundation is put in terms of having this beautiful place where Yahweh is and all these beautiful colors. We see again a reiteration of that in Ezekiel in terms of Yahweh decking out his bride with all these beautiful colors that we learn from other places. These colors represent Yahweh and his splendor and his goodness, which is also exemplary of his character, of his word, who is Yeshua, who is the representation of the glory and the brightness of Elohim. But when we're looking at it from an old covenant perspective, where the brightness and the glory wasn't something that was internalized in the people. It was something that was just on the people, right? So they took that glory and that splendor, those ways that Yahweh had given to the people, and then they were just giving it out to the other people with no parameters, with no boundaries.
I don't think they realized what they had.
Well, they began to believe their own hype, it says. Which, at the end of the day, the only way it could have ever ended up was this way, because when we look back, all of these things happen really to show us what needs to be, which is Yeshua. We was never going to be able to make it with just having these trinkets on us. We was never going to be able to make it with just having these ways about us. It always needed to be something that happened on the inside of us, where we're actually changed, and these things became more than just jewels and fine linens and so on and so forth that was put on us, but was something that actually changed us and transformed us from the inside.
I think about people who get married and have these lavish weddings and stuff. They don't even last.
Yeah. It's the same kind of a concept where,
Yahweh bestows upon Israel.
Made his bride just the most beautifulest thing that she could be.
Put a crown,
everything. Just made her, just decked her out. And she took all of that beauty that was given to her and used it for harlotry, or used it for someone else other than her husband. That's how we do, unfortunately, outside of Yeshua. Okay, is there any thoughts or comments about any of that before we look at Matthew? We're getting ready to be done here. We'll look at a couple of things in Matthew, chapter 23. Can you read 23, 1 through 28?
The whole chapter.
Is that the whole chapter?
1 through 28.
It's not that long. Is that the whole thing?
I don't think so. Then Yahshua spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and observe, but do not according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. And they tie up heavy loads and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. But they do all their deeds to be noticed by men. For they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels on their garments. And they love the place of honor at banquets, and the chief seats in the synagogues, and respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and being called by men Rabbi. But do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, and you all are brethren. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called leaders, for one is your leader, and that is Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be your servants. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from men. For you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you devour widows' houses, even while for a pretense you make long prayers. Therefore you shall receive greater condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel about on sea and land to make one proselyte. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, that is nothing. Whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obligated. You fools and blind men, which is more important, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? Whoever swears by the altar, that is nothing. But whoever swears by the offering upon it, he is obligated. You blind men, which is more important, the offering or the altar that sanctifies the offering? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears both by the altar and everything on. And he who swears by the temple swears by both the temple and by him who dwells within it. And he who swears by heaven swears both by the throne of Elohim and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides who strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but the inside is full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup of the and of the dish, so that the outside of it may become clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but the inside are men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness.
Okay, so we look at this, we see Yeshua here speaking to his disciples, and also speaking to and about the scribes and the Pharisees that were always around when he was, teaching. So when we look at this, we can see the connection between here and in Ezekiel by the actions of Israel in Ezekiel, is where they had the word, they had the adornments, they had the beauty of Yahweh, they had it, but they did not use it to its fullness. What they did was they trusted in their own selves, in their own power, in their own might. You look at the Pharisees here, where Yeshua tells the people, therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, whatever they tell you, whatever the scribes and the Pharisees tell you to do, do it. Which he's really talking about the word,
The teaching.
What they teach you, do that. Because they're teaching you the word. They're teaching you the jewels of Yahweh. That's the beauty of Yahweh, which is his words. Right? They're teaching you those things. The problem is that they're not doing it. They're not doing it. Right? Whatever they do, observe and do that. But do not you after their works. For they say and they do not. Right? So the other week I don't know when it was I talked about it. I guess I could just flip to it again where in James, where it just says, don't only be hearers of the word. Don't just hear the word. but be doers of the word. Right? Hearers and doers. Right? Here we're talking about the Pharisees, the scribes and the Pharisees were sayers. They were sayers of the word. I mean, they were sayers of the word, but not doers. But Yeshua is calling for his people, for his disciples to be doers of the word. All that they say, do. And then, you know, the main gripe that he has with the Pharisees on every level is just a continuation of the fact that they teach the word, they know the word, but they're not doing the word. It's interesting to me that you have inside mainstream Christianity the thought process that we're not supposed to be. You can't just say, you can't just take the law of Yahweh and just throw it in the garbage. Because when we talk about what the law of Yahweh represents, it only represents Yahweh's beauty. It only represents Yahweh's glorious splendor put on us. Right? When we look at it, understand it for what it actually and truly is, being the character of Yahweh, we understand that the spirit that Yahweh has sent and put on the inside of us is not something that causes us to jump and dance around and fall out, but it causes us to walk in righteousness. It causes us to represent the splendor and the glory of Yahweh, which is his commandments, which is his right rulings. That spirit inside of us causes us to be the opposite of what he's talking to these Pharisees about and what they're being or not being. How they're clean on the outside and dirty on the inside. That's the same thing that we talked about. We talked about the harlot in Ezekiel, who had all of these things on them. They had all of the things on them, but inside it was dirty harlots. Yahweh's word just remains true all the way throughout. And we're able to see when we look back at the tabernacle, when we look at the various examples in Ezekiel, and then also when we looked at the various examples of the we're given all this imagery of this beautiful, illustrious, shiny, all this imagery, but really it's just a picture of what Yeshua is, which is the brightness and the glory of Yahweh, which is the manifestation of his word. Right? So when we think about what Yeshua came to do, he came to do in us what he called into question and called out the Pharisees about, is the fact that they knew and taught the word, but it wasn't in them. They was clean on the outside, white and beautiful, clean individuals, but on the inside they were dead. Right? Blind guides, he calls them. Woe to you, in verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides. Lastly, down we look at verse 23, where it says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. Wait a minute. So does that mean that the law contains justice, mercy, and faithfulness? Is he saying that the law contains justice, mercy, and faithfulness? But then people are telling me that thing is old and it don't mean anything anymore. It doesn't make any sense, right? But he's saying, woe to them, you hypocrites, who neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. In other words, you said you should have been doing all of the things, but you're paying attention to these things that don't mean anything, and you're forgetting about the weightier things. But he's not saying pick one other than the one that you're picking. He's saying you're supposed to be doing all of those things. These are the teachings of Yeshua. This is what he's teaching. And it's not even hidden anywhere. It's right there in red letters.
It's just funny that their thoughts are about all these little meticulous
Why though?
things.
Mint and dill and cumin. And I know he's just not making this stuff up.
He probably is what they really
That's real life. He probably knew a particular Pharisee that sat up there and was sitting up there tithing some spices. He was probably standing right over there. The guy, whoever he was talking about, in his face.
But I actually was just thinking about how, and he's talking about people calling him rabbi and all of this, and just looking at some of the people. Not to say that everyone who's called rabbi is bad or whatever, but just some of them get into these types of outward type modes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, if you really look at their lives, it's like they don't even keep the Sabbath.
Right.
You know, after their services, they go out to eat, and you know what I mean. Like, it's just amazing to me that
Speaking about that, I don't think that this is like a blanket prohibition
I don't think so.
for the title rabbi, and I say that really only because of where he takes it to father.
Call me my father or leader.
Or
And
or master.
leaders. Yeah.
Right? I don't think that the idea here is just a blanket prohibition of these different titles. But I think in the context, you got these people here who you better give me my due and call me what I'm supposed to be called. And meanwhile, they're not really living up to they're following under all the criteria that he's laying out for us here as these hypocrites. Yeah. These people who want to put this emphasis on this position of glory, but they're not dealing with their own hearts on the inside. I think that's really the key here, not where he's saying that you can't be called father or rabbi or so on and so forth.
Most of the people who say that, then they want to be called like elder so and so, and it's kind of like, well, that's the same thing,
right?
It's still, even if you use the term elder,
right? It still kind of fits into this whole
having a title, and I think that people do need to have titles because, unfortunately, people get so high-minded about things, but. I just think that if you're going to have that title, then you got to at least examine and be open to, that mirror or whatever.
Yeah. And not right, the mirror,
And
not look at the mirror and see the stink and the filth and on you, and then as soon as you turn around, you can't.
I forgot.
That's the point.
I was looking at the part where it says call no man. I think it's like, it's the humanity of it. The people are taking that person and lifting them up to be more important. That they're the ones that are giving the truth. They're the ones that have the wisdom and the knowledge, and they're going to You know, instead of calling, like as if all this wisdom and stuff is coming from them. And the message is like, you know, you call them father. You know, they're not the ones. That's not the source of wisdom and knowledge. You know, they're not the ones that it's coming from. It's coming from above. It's coming from the Father.
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely think that inside of this, the idea is the focus, like what you're saying, and also the sincerity and the absence of hypocrisy. You know, which is the main emphasis of what he's going through in terms of talking about these Pharisees and these Sadducees and so on and so forth. We can't say that it's not, you know, that it's just blanket talking about, you know, not for people to have these different titles and, you know, everybody's on equal playing field, so on and so forth. Because we see, you know, in Israel, in the congregation, you know, there's right, there's different hierarchies that's inside of it. There's different levels. Not to say that one is better or you know greater or higher, so on and so forth. But there is government and there is order to the thing. But none of that means anything if you're in hypocrisy. If you're not actually practicing what you preach, right? Which is what the point is here. These people ain't practicing what they're preaching. He said, listen to what they preaching, but don't do what they're doing because they're not even doing what they're preaching. But yes, you're right in what you're saying about that.
People do that pastor worship and
yeah, exactly.
all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we got to where we're at now.
Yeah. Okay, so on that note, does anybody have anything else to add? Because if not, we're gonna go ahead and shut it down for now. I don't want to be on here too late at night tonight. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop this thing.